I may have mentioned before, I did some sound design for a video game. It was a massive multiplayer online game, and I had to turn in about 6,000 files in 6 months. A student was asking me about the project. It was called Fallen Earth with Icarus Studios up in Cary, North Carolina. And the thing I may have mentioned before was the ability for me to handle a spreadsheet was actually part of the interview process for that job. So it wasn't just about sound design, it was about how well I could keep track of the file names of 6,000 files because every file name needed to be perfect or it would not be implemented into the game. It could not be implemented into the game. So other types of sound design relate to something that starts musical and dives into sound design, which is kind of what we're doing. And I also wanted to mention this project here, which is when I was working on another sound effects library, and it started as sound effects and turned into musical stuff because the requirements for that gig were to take all of the sound effects in the library and to arrange them in a way where people could hear them, but not take them from the recording, and also be able to hear layers and layers of sounds from the library. And I couldn't add any EQ, I couldn't add any reverb. It was all pure samples. So a lot of this, just volume and panning, cuts and fades. I was working in Pro Tools, probably had 10 or 12 tracks going sometimes in terms of fades. But if you want to listen to some of it here, this is actually part of the demo, about like a minute and a half of it, and it's all pure, just volume and panning, cuts and fades in Pro Tools. So for musical projects, I want to talk more about sound design because that's really where our focus is going to be. You need to consider pitch if you're doing anything, particularly in the sub range. Okay, for sub bass, even when it comes to sound design, I always think about and try and talk to the composers. For instance, when I was working on the video game, I was doing sound design, and I had some conversations with the composer about what key he was in certain levels for the background music, for the ambient music. So if I did anything with sound design, I actually wanted to be sympathetic to the key that he had composed the music in. You guys follow that? So it was interesting because nobody apparently had had a conversation like that with him before. So that made me feel good that I was actually thinking at a level of continuity that maybe he hadn't experienced or the team hadn't experienced before. And it didn't take much work for me to document what I needed in terms of where the music was changing keys and what was happening in the flow of the game. So it was really interesting in that relationship. So sound design actually became pitch and key centered also. So that's kind of why I'm highlighting this. Okay, for your project, maybe the same thing. I do hear that. Listen, in hip hop tunes, sometimes the kick drum and the bass get in the way of each other, and they're only like a step apart, and it just creates tremendous distortion and waves, in the bottom end of things. So really, even tuning a kick drum, pitching a kick drum up or down a couple of semitones, sometimes really makes a big difference. And obviously, drones and low sub bass are going to be more related to pitch and key. So in the realm of synthesis and noise, it's kind of where I'm going tonight. If you guys want to add cool stuff, I'm going to show you a couple of engines to play with. So we'll go ahead and we'll work our way into that also. All right. So, of course, at the end of this, producers always like to add what's referred to as ear candy, kind of a mixing element. We were talking about it from the big picture where you sweeten things and master things for radio. Ear candy is always a good thing. You hear things like that in transitions. It started maybe early EDM. We're talking about even adding more ear candy for electronic music, but reverse cymbals, things like that are real obvious ones now. And so things that will help you maybe transition between sections of music. So at this point also, I think it's worth mentioning again that this is your fourth project in your portfolio. And I want you to think about the idea of cutting down the four pieces that you have in your Wix portfolio, taking four pieces of music, basically the hooks from each one, and editing them into maybe 90 minutes or I'm sorry, 90 seconds or 2 minutes, maybe like 20 or 30 seconds of each piece. And think about of the four pieces, which one you would put first, which one you would put at the end, what shape that would create. And so that kind of folds into a lot of this too in terms of sound design. I would actually want to include music editing also because that's part of this too when you talk about ear candy and synthesis and noise and just all those types of things that you can add that are just really elemental sometimes to a piece. So we're looking for sound design, 20 to 30 seconds for same kind of thing for your file. Think about something that might work, as one of the variations on your Wix page. Okay, same thing, short text document if you would for the sound design.